You clicked the thumbnail. I came. So Hellraiser is kind of a funny franchise because for as much as everybody knows about it, I think everybody's basically heard of Hellraiser. Scary fans and not. They've all seen Pinhead. They've seen the cover of him holding the cube.
Who you calling Pinhead?
I have relatives when I was growing up talk to me about this film. I had some friends before I'd ever seen it because I saw this one in the last 5 years or so. It was just a franchise I never got into. They told me, wait until you watch Hellraiser, man. That thing is gory. That thing is, there's so much torture. It is rough. You better cover your eyes watching that thing. I watched it, and it's not really what they depicted at all because most people think when they see the cover, like a lot of 80s franchises, Pinhead's going to be centric to it. It's going to be him torturing people. He's going to be killing people. He's not really even focal to what this movie's about. In fact, I think the entire Hellraiser franchise, after the first and second film, I think basically just about everybody agrees is absolutely terrible and unwatchable. So it's kind of funny that it's even garnered the reputation it has and there's that many films being made. Kind of feels like the entire franchise is kind of just the redheaded stepchild of horror franchises where we all know it's there, don't want to acknowledge it. Nobody's dressing up as Pinhead, no iconic scenes, nothing that just gets referenced in the horror community. And I have to say, I kind of understand that rhetoric because this is a film that I understand why it was iconic and why it was so groundbreaking, but I've just never understood why it's held to such high regard that it is. It does some things well, I will admit. Some of the things it's talking about, pain and pleasure and maybe commentary at the time, I just don't understand how it got the reputation it got. And it's Clive Barker's Hellraiser. It's labeled like it's a Shakespeare film, like it's so iconic. It's fine. I don't know if it's worth putting your name attached to it, like that's your legacy work. It's fine. I noticed this thing where people who talk to you about this film and have never seen it really don't have any idea what it's about. They see Pinhead on the cover, they hear about the gore, they hear about the torture, and they're just completely turned off by the film. They just have no interest. It's like Hostel 2.0 to them. And it's funny because I watched this with somebody last weekend who'd heard of it, and they had heard the rumors of the gore and how gross it was. They could not watch it. And for some reason, they said, let's watch Hellraiser. And I was like, I've already seen it. It's fine. Like, if you want to watch it, I'll watch it. So we watched it, and they were so surprised at how unironically funny this movie is at times, how silly the plot is, how poorly a lot of the elements of this film age. Everything they'd heard about it was completely misdirected. They were like, where's Pinhead? And I'm like, yeah, he's coming, but he's not really centric to this. Like, they didn't believe anything I said. I guess maybe that's the power of this film's legacy or something, that people have been led astray so much. But I just thought it was funny, and I had to point out that story, how a lot of people who have never seen this really don't even know what it's about. What the film's actually about instead of Pinheads, it follows Julia, the stepmom. She's cheating on her husband with his brother named Frank. And Frank's like this sexual deviant, and he's just getting into it all the time. He finds this Rubik's Cube type thing called the Lament configuration, messes around with it, and then Pinhead and the Dirty Boys come and drag him down to hell, and they take his flesh. So the entire premise of the film basically is Julia's trying to spill blood for Frank so that he can get his human flesh back. All the while, her stepdaughter Kirsty kind of figures out something weird is going on with all of them. And as I said, this film actually plays out really slow. It's kind of a slow burn. In fact, I think it's pretty boring at some points. It's not what you think it is. I think the gore is to be heralded. I think the practical effects are really good for the 80s. A lot of nasty, visceral images. But to be frank, it's 2024, and we're so desensitized now. I mean, you could find stuff more disgusting in 5 minutes on Twitter. Just search something up. It's uncensored. You'll find something. So at a time where the only sell was torture and gore and pleasure and pain, I understand what they're going for. I just think that the film in general doesn't really age that well because all they really have going for it is the disgusting visceral imagery. Now, the biggest positive by far to this film, especially if you come from binging the other 80s franchises, is how unique this film feels to watch. When you come from Halloween and Friday the 13th and Chucky, you watch this one and it plays a lot differently. There's no guy in a mask. It's not a B-horror movie slasher. It feels a lot more original, the concept of her killing people for another guy, bringing him back from the dead. It feels a lot more cerebral and weird, and just you mix it with the imagery, the entire experience just feels like something you're not supposed to be watching, if that makes sense. Compared to the other B-horror franchises, which are just kind of fun and you watch people get killed, this movie is at no point fun. You never really have fun watching this film. So in that regard, I do think it's effective because when you mix the unique concept with the gore, I understand why it stood out. Again, I just don't think it really holds up that well in 2024. I also kind of want to talk about the final girl in this, Kirsty. I actually like her character a good bit. I think she's written pretty cool for a final girl. I think there's some potential there. But that's really the word, potential. Every time I leave this film, I kind of leave thinking there was untapped potential. There was just not enough there. And I think that's kind of the reason you never hear about her, much like this franchise in general, Pinhead and all of the Hellraisers. You don't hear about Kirsty amongst Laurie Strode, Nancy. I think people just think this is an untapped character. In number one, I think she's a fine foundation of a character, just never fully realized. I've always kind of found Hellraiser to be an exploitative film. It's for gore fiends, where if you like blood and torture and that's really your type of horror, that's what upsets you or that's what you like, it's probably right in your wheelhouse. It's probably one of your favorites, because I would imagine in the 80s, this was so iconic and so groundbreaking, and it was so scarring to so many people. Again, as I said, I think it holds up somewhat practically, but compared to what other stuff we see nowadays, because of how desensitized we've become, I think it loses a lot of its oomph and what kind of makes it unique. But that's probably the major appeal. If that's your type of horror, that's the lane you're aiming for, it's probably one of your favorites. But I've always just kind of found this film to be very circular and kind of boring, because it just plays the same way throughout. A lot of nasty images like bugs, cockroaches, blood, cuts, all these things that are just supposed to be sensory overload, disgusting. And it's just a vicious cycle of what keeps happening, where Julia keeps bringing people over, killing them, keep bringing Frank alive, and it just keeps going over and over. And it's one of those films where it feels like you find out what it is within 15 minutes, then it just does the same 15 minutes 4 different times over and over again. So I've always found this film to be a little bit boring and repetitive if you're not really into the images. That's what the person I watched this with for the first time thought as well. That's kind of my biggest negative to this. I just don't think this film really holds up, even though it is unique, because the way it's filmed is just so outdated. It's not even until the final 20 minutes or so that you actually meet Pinhead and the other Cenobites. Pinhead, really cool, iconic character. I understand why people got fascinated with him. So much potential. I always thought that guy whose teeth chirp really fast like that's probably actually the creepiest thing in this film. He's what I understand would probably make people the most upset when they watch it. But the other two Cenobites, I think, are laughable. I've always laughed whenever this movie's on. The guy who looks like a melting version of Jabba the Hutt with glasses, that guy's the funniest thing ever. There's nothing scary about that guy. You can't convince me otherwise. After I watched this for the first time, I went back and checked when it came out, and it came out 3 years after Nightmare on Elm Street. And I've always found whatever they're doing in the Cenobites world, that very cerebral, dreamlike world, to just be a direct ripoff of Nightmare on Elm Street. Again, I don't know if it's just me, if that's what you guys think, but I think it's just a very watered down, less original, more lame version of Freddy's World, which I highly prefer to this one. I don't know, my first experience with this film was so unique, where I had the bar set so high by relatives, like they gassed it up so much, talked about the legacy of it, how gory it was, how it was so hard to watch. And Pinhead's in it, and I thought he was going to be centric to it, and he wasn't really in it. So I kind of left watching this film for the first time being disappointed. And to be honest, my viewpoint on it has not really changed since then. I still kind of feel the same way about it every time I watch it. So overall, guys, I do understand why this was so groundbreaking, because of the gore and the commentary on pleasure and pain. Great practical effects if that's your thing. An iconic villain in Pinhead. Kirsty's a good final girl. But I leave this film feeling the exact same way every time, that it's a giant ball of untapped potential. We don't get enough of Pinhead and the Cenobites. Kirsty's not a fully realized final girl yet. It's kind of a slow burn, downright boring at times. Always leave this film feeling a little bit disappointed. I would only recommend this film if you got nothing else to do. So are you guys in the camp that this is iconic, or do you think it's a bit overrated like me? Comment down below, let me know. As always, if you haven't subscribed, join me down below. Love to have you, but that's all I got in this video. Peace.